Alright guys, so the protests on university campuses around the United States over Israel's genocidal war on the people of Gaza are continuing to expand at the same time that the crackdowns on these protests are continuing to escalate. So don't be intimidated by the sheer amount of tabs that I have open here in Google Chrome, but we have a lot to get into here. So to start us off, we're going to go to the University of Texas, where the governor, Greg Abbott, self-proclaimed free speech warrior, ordered the state troopers to go and attack these peaceful protesters, okay? Now, there's also a constitutional issue with this that we'll get to here in a second, but in this first video, I want you guys to focus on this guy in the jeans with the blue backpack and the clearly visible giant camera on his shoulder, a journalist here, who is there to record everything that's happening. And so, as you can see here, he's getting shoved around, the cops are going, shoving students around, they're shoving press around. He gets sort of brought into this, and then he gets grabbed from behind, thrown to the ground, looks like the camera may have hit his head there, and then arrested. Now, later on, he went and he did an interview as he was being arrested, and he was asked, why is this happening to you? And he says, I don't know, they accused me of assaulting a police officer, and then they're now arresting me. And apparently later he gets charged with trespassing. Trespassing. A journalist who was on a public university campus covering student protesters was arrested, initially accused of assaulting a police officer, which, as we can just see from the video there, is a brazen lie, and then was charged with trespassing. I mean, this is where we're at, guys. We have governors and mayors, etc., around the United States, Democrats and Republicans, who are having the police go and brutalize peaceful student protesters who are out here protesting against our government's complicity in an ongoing genocide. Now, we'll get to the historic comparisons here, specifically at Columbia University with the Vietnam War protests back from 1968, because it really is just amazing how much overlap there is, and the same exact mistakes being repeated once again. But I got a few more things to jump into here. So this is day 2. This is the day after that massive state trooper crackdown at the University of Texas. And they say here that not only are they out there to support Gaza, but also to condemn the police response that we just watched. They say the crowd is at least 5 times larger than the crowd that showed up yesterday. Peaceful, quiet, very little law enforcement presence. So, I mean, this is something that I guess these universities are going to have to find out at some point, that you cannot simply just go and try to mass arrest students and faculty and just expect that that is going to solve the problem. This is just going to escalate things. It's going to escalate these peaceful protests into violent protests, and it's also just going to lead to more people coming out. I mean, this is how this shit works. You're never going to be able to violently repress these people into submission. It's not going to fucking work. And clearly, this has been the case not only at the University of Texas, but all across the country. Now, hear from the governor who ordered these state troopers to go and attack these protesters. He says, arrests being made right now and will continue until the crowd disperses. These protesters belong in jail. Antisemitism will not be tolerated in Texas, period. Students joining in hate-filled anti-Semitic protests at any public college or university in Texas should be expelled. So first off, again, we've talked about this extensively already in my last couple of videos talking about these protests. These are not anti-Semitic protests, okay? Is it possible that if you go to the fringes at literally any protest that you can find people saying and doing crazy shit? Of course you can. Of course you could find some person who's in the surrounding area of one of these protests who's going to have some sign that's edgy, or it does borderline, verge on anti-Semitism, or whatever the case may be. But that is not what these protests are about. The idea that these Republican governors, Democratic politicians, the media, the idea that they want to convince you of is that thousands of students across this country are taking to their university campuses to protest not an ongoing genocide, not the 15,000 children that have been killed over the last 6 months, not Gaza being flattened into oblivion, none of that, but they're actually going out there because they want to kill all the Jews. That is the idea that they are trying to spread. I mean, I can't get over how absolutely insane and absurdly dishonest that is at face value. Okay, yeah, these students are out here because they all just woke up one day and decided we hate Jewish people. I mean, what the fuck are we talking about here, guys? Now, we continue. We have more here from Greg Abbott. So this is just from 2019, about 5 years ago. He says, I just signed a law protecting free speech on college campuses. Let's listen to a little bit of this. I'll put it on 1.25 times speed.
Some colleges are banning free speech on college campuses. Well, no more, because I'm about to sign a law that protects free speech on college campuses in Texas.
Right. So turns out the free speech that he was talking about has a little exception clause in there that you're not allowed to criticize Israel. Okay? That's apparently what free speech means in these people's minds. And this goes for conservatives across the board. I don't want to hear a single fucking word from these people ever again about free speech. You do not believe in free speech. Even if you wanted to categorize unfairly and falsely these protests as broadly anti-Semitic, that is still, believe it or not, free speech. The entire point of having a First Amendment, the entire point of having free speech is that people are allowed to say shit that you may find abhorrent, that you may find disgusting. In the same way that I find anti-Semitism, actual anti-Semitism, for example, at like the Charlottesville March, I find that to be disgusting and abhorrent, right, and bigoted. But at the same time, people have a right to express disgusting opinions. So my point in saying that is like, obviously these protests are not broadly anti-Semitic, but him coming out here and saying anti-Semitism will not be tolerated, these protesters belong in jail. What he's saying here is not that these people violated XYZ laws and so they deserve to be thrown in jail. He's saying they have an opinion, and he's wrong about the opinion that they have, but he's saying they have an opinion that I disagree with, that I think is disgusting, so they should be thrown in jail and expelled from school because of that opinion, right? So, I mean, there's no possible argument you can make that you believe in free speech, okay? And again, the categorization here of these protests being anti-Semitic, I'm gonna get to later in this video a couple of examples, like with the I was stabbed in the eye girl and a couple other ones of people claiming that they were victims of violent anti-Semitism at these protests, and after we get the video of what actually happened, they're completely debunked and exposed as liars and frauds. So we'll get to some of that here in a second. One more thing on UT Austin. This was posted 6 months ago. Okay, I guess by the college itself. I mean, this is really amazing, guys. Let's go ahead and watch this.
Why can members of the public come to campus at any time and engage in demonstrations and speeches?
So state law in Texas actually allows members of the public, just like our university community, to come onto campus and use our common outdoor areas for speech activity. I think that surprises a lot of students. They show up here and they think, who is this random stranger setting up a table talking about a thing I find upsetting? But that's protected by state law. And why?
Wow, isn't that something? So again, as I indicated at the beginning of this video, there's also an issue here with constitutionality, not just, because at some of these universities, right, at Columbia University, for example, that is a private institution. So even though morally, I still think that it's completely wrong to go and send the NYPD in to go and bust up these student protesters, morally, that's just as wrong as what's happening at University of Texas. But this is a public university. And as she just said there, under state law, and as protected by the First Amendment, not just students, but apparently anybody, any random person, as long as they're not being violent, they have the right to go on these public spaces on campus and to protest. They can protest however, whatever they want. And I actually remember this when I was living on Georgia State University campus, okay? And I remember going to classes, and we also had certain parts of campus where you would have people who were protesting. And we had this one lawn that was like in the center of the university where hundreds, thousands of students would pass by every day. And I remember passing by there, and you would see the craziest motherfuckers standing on that corner. You would see people, from like the Westboro Baptist Church or whatever, who would be standing out there holding up hateful signs saying gay people are going to hell and whatever else, right? And what I remember is that people basically just went about their day, okay? At the most, maybe a student walks by and they say, fuck you, go fuck yourself. They hold up a middle finger, whatever the case may be. Most people just walk by and completely ignore it. But I remember that because that also applies at, I believe, my college that I went to, Georgia State University, and it also applies here to any public university, especially in Texas. The law says people can go and protest at these locations, right? So, I mean, you have this added aspect here that the governor ordering state troopers to go and bust up these students is also illegal. It's unconstitutional, right? On top of, again, being morally wrong. Now, this was also happening in Atlanta, here at Emory University. They arrested, like, the chair of the philosophy department. I mean, it's pointed out here by Mehdi Hassan. Unarmed, middle-aged, female philosophy professors. What is happening in America right now? Imagine you saw these scenes in Iran or Venezuela. Imagine then the U.S. media response. And we actually don't even have to imagine. Because when Iran cracks down on some protesters inside their country, what is the U.S. response? Well, they condemn it, number one, and then they impose sanctions, right? So we sanction other foreign adversaries, or whatever you want to call them. We sanction them, okay, when they crack down domestically on their populations. But when it happens here in the United States, somehow this is what exactly? This is fighting against a wave of anti-Semitism. This is protecting law and order. I mean, it's just a complete double standard. Does this woman here look like she's violent? Does she look like she's a fucking threat to anybody here? This is a philosophy professor who clearly went out to, like, join her students who were protesting at Emory University. I mean, what are we doing, guys? Here at USC, right? So I want to give you guys a broad perspective here. It's not just, oh, it's the Republican governor of Texas. It's all over the place. It's in Atlanta. It's in LA. It's in New York. Everywhere. At USC, police have locked themselves inside campus and closed the gates to students who continue to protest the repression. I mean, guys, we live in a country where we apparently can't afford to pay for universal health care, we can't afford to pay for universal housing, we can't address the climate crisis, we can't do fucking anything that actually materially benefits the American people, but we can somehow pay for a bunch of armed guards to go and flood a university and occupy it, and prevent students from being on that university. Why? Because they dared to go out and protest against our complicity in a genocide. I mean, what are we doing as a country? Now, just one more image here, right? I mean, look at the sheer amount of police vehicles. This was headed to the University of Texas. These are the state troopers that I just showed you guys. I mean, we could pay for 30 some odd police vehicles full of state troopers to go crack some skulls of some peaceful student protesters. But we can't pay for healthcare. It's amazing, guys. Here's another picture, which I think says a lot. You got this police officer who is literally pointing a weapon directly in the face of a journalist, it looks like here, who's trying to film what's going on. I mean, it's dark times, guys. Very dark times. Now, again, circling back to Columbia, this almost broke me when I saw this. On Columbia University's official webpage, they have this. Columbia is a far different place today than it was in the spring of 1968 when protesters took over university buildings amid discontent about the Vietnam War, racism, and the university's proposed expansion to Morningside Park. After a week-long standoff, the New York City police stormed the campus and arrested more than 700 people. The fallout dogged Columbia for years. It took decades for the university to recover from those turbulent times. Columbia now has one of the most socioeconomically diverse student bodies amongst its peer institutions. It has added a new campus designed to be open to the community and pursues fields of inquiry unheard of half a century ago. Columbia is commemorating the 50th anniversary of those long ago events with a deep dive of scholarship and exhibits chronicling what happened then and its effects today. They have a page on their website explaining how they fucked up against the Vietnam War student protesters by sicking the cops on them for occupying parts of campus. So it would be nice, just once, if we could learn the lessons from history and actually implement them in real time instead of just creating the same history over and over and over again. This is as close to a one-to-one correlation as you could possibly ask for. They just a few days ago sent in the NYPD to go and arrest students who were doing the exact same thing as what happened in 1968. And then they suspended the students. I mean, they've been arresting faculty all over the country. Jesus Christ, guys. Now, this tweet, I think, summarizes a lot of what people are starting to come to grips with right now. A liberal is someone who opposes every war except the current war and supports all civil rights movements except the one that's going on right now. This is a perfect encapsulation of what a lot of people are starting to realize right now about the establishment of the Democratic Party, or about liberals in general, right? They support every war. They oppose every war except the current one. The current one, I can kind of wiggle my way into finding a justification for that. Oh, I support civil rights movements, right? I'm super progressive, guys. But then at the end of the day, when it's actually happening right now in real time, where are you? You're out there calling for the police to go and crack down on these protesters. Now this one pissed me off almost more than anything else. Benjamin Netanyahu, the man who has been spending the last 6 months blowing up every single university building that he can get his hands on inside of Gaza. Okay, here from the UN. Experts decry systemic obliteration of the education system in Gaza. They say here, 5,800 students and teachers have been killed, and a further 8,500 have been injured. Many others have been arrested, while attacks on places of learning have left more than 625,000 students without any ability to study. They also said 80% of the schools in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. The guy who did that, this terrorist on the screen right now, is coming out and lecturing the United States of America about protests against his genocide. We have the guy whose genocide our government is arming and funding now lecturing us about protests against his genocide. He compared it to German universities in the 1930s. So let's translate. He's calling peace advocates, he's calling ceasefire proponents, he's calling people who are anti-genocide Nazis. That's what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing right now. If there's anybody who's a Nazi, a modern version of the Nazis, it's you. It's you. Let's be clear about that. I mean, Jesus Christ. Up here, Elon Musk. The free speech absolutist, right? Retweeting Benjamin Netanyahu calling for the United States government to crack down on our student protesters. Now we also have Mike Johnson, Republican Speaker of the House. Now this was amazing. He was basically giving a speech at Columbia where he was getting shouted down, booed by some of the protesters. And he says this, I guess as a criticism of the protesters, or a way to portray them as sort of anti-Semitic. He said, quote, "They deny that infants were placed into ovens and burnt alive on October 7th. That's what he's talking about. Guys, that did not happen on October 7th. Even Israeli outlets, months ago at this point, have debunked this story. The 40 beheaded babies, the babies in the ovens, those stories were completely fabricated. They were made up, they were never real, they never happened, they were lies, in order to justify mass atrocities against civilians in Gaza. And he is still repeating this right now. So listen, again, it detracts from the ability to even understand what anti-Semitism really is when you're saying shit like this. You are blurring the line. And it's like, it would be one thing if the people who don't like these protesters were coming out and they were saying, well, here's a specific incident where I think this slogan is offensive, right? Or here's somebody who is saying something that is anti-Semitic. Or here's an instance of violence that I object to. All of that, if you were being nuanced about it, if you were being honest about it, that would be totally fine to come out and to criticize. But that is not what they're doing. They are saying all of these protesters are terrorists, all of them are pro-Hamas, all of them want to genocide the Jewish people, all of them are violent. That's what they're saying, okay? He's actually trying to attack the protesters because they're denying something that verifiably did not happen. That's where we're at. Now, we also have, of course, Nancy Pelosi. So again, it's Republicans, it's also Democrats. Still saying the same shit that she's been saying for months now. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi suggests some pro-Palestine protests, especially those against Biden, have a Russian tinge to it. So we've been called Hamas, we've been called Hezbollah, we've been called the Houthis, we've been called Iranian stooges, we've been called Chinese puppets, and now we're Putin puppets as well. What kind of resume are we putting together here, guys? It's in Putin's interest for, what's his name? I guess that's like a subtle dig at Trump, to win, and therefore I see some encouragement on the part of the Russians. So let's be 100% clear on this. This is just as deranged as anything Marjorie Taylor Greene or Donald Trump have ever said. It's just as deranged. This is Blue Anon type shit. She's basically making the argument that she thinks Putin wants Trump to win, and so because Putin wants Trump to win, that means anybody who criticizes Biden must just be, by some like string of events, doing Putin's bidding. That's the argument that she's making. If you criticize Biden, you are doing Putin's bidding. That's what she's saying here. Okay? Which is, it's deeply ironic, because you know who's hurting Biden's chances of beating Trump right now? Joe Biden. That's who's hurting his chances. I mean, supporting a genocide 6-7 months straight now at this point. Not listening to any of the young people who you need to win the next election, spitting in our faces over and over and over again, trying to gaslight the hell out of us. Do you think that's a winning strategy? But they have no ability to look internally at their own flaws or to listen to the people who are giving good faith criticisms of them. They would rather just smear us. They would rather just try to burn it all to the ground, I guess. You guys, if anybody's going to be responsible for getting Trump into the White House again, it's you guys, for being absolutely delusional about the current political state of what is going on. Now, this was also amazing. Jonathan Greenblatt, this psycho motherfucker from the Anti-Defamation League, or as many people call it, the Apartheid Defense League, he said, Iran has their military proxies like Hezbollah, and Iran has their campus proxies like these groups. Now get ready for it. He says, like Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voices for Peace. Here we have the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League who is defaming a Jewish student organization. Just going to pause on that for a second here, guys. Just in case there was any hiccup, there was any confusion about what this guy's job is. This guy's job is not to go out there and to battle against anti-Semitism. It is to go out there and to battle against criticism of Israel. He's attacking Jewish Voices for Peace as being like a terrorist proxy group. That's what he's saying here. Amazing. Now we also have this. Again, same network, MSNBC, seems to have a pretty strong take on all of this. Blaming TikTok. Gosh, God, it's just so good. If you look at TikTok, there are 52 videos that are pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian for every one that's served on Israel. I mean, so the other day, or I think today or yesterday, Joe Biden is going to be signing a bill to officially ban TikTok. This was lumped in with the Israel funding, the Ukraine funding, the Taiwan funding, all of that. They're banning TikTok, or forcing the sale of TikTok under the threat of a ban. Effectively, it's a ban at the end of the day. And the reason that they're doing that is this. This is an admission of why this TikTok ban is happening. It's because they think there's too much pro-Palestinian content going on. Now, the confusion here for Scott Galloway is that he seems to think that the reason there's more pro-Palestinian content on TikTok is because the Chinese government is like forcing it up in the algorithm. Instead of, hey, maybe young people who are very active on social media, who have been watching the last 6 months of this genocide and relentlessly are seeing, dead children being pulled from the rubble, maybe those people have an issue with that. Maybe they have an issue with genocide or ethnic cleansing or apartheid, and maybe they're a little bit more aware of the facts of what has been going on over the last 6 months than an average MSNBC commentator or viewer, for that matter. And so they're turning around and pretending as if that's the cause for this. No, the reason pro-Palestine content is more popular on TikTok is because young people are more critical of Israel. Why? Not because of TikTok, not because of social media, but because of Israel's actions. That's why we're more critical of Israel. I mean, these are the kinds of conversations that are happening on mainstream media. It's genuinely unbelievable. Now, we're going to get to a couple different things here. So, basically, at some of these protests that have been going on these campuses, we have had many different examples of people either lying about things that happened to them or going out there seemingly like trying to be victimized in order to portray these protests as violently anti-Semitic. So this was one. I think the original post either got taken down or the person who posted it blocked me because I quote tweeted it. But here we have a Jewish woman who went out to these protests and, is standing out in the middle with a shirt on that says Jew on the front, and I believe on the back it has a Star of David. And she's standing out here, and her husband posts this video saying, "Aren't we so brave being out here?" As if they're like standing in the middle of a group of ISIS members or something like that. I mean, what are we doing? Now, of course, and this isn't loading for me right now, but of course, everybody around that's watching this all happen doesn't give a fuck that she's there. Nobody's paying attention. They're dancing in the background. They're playing music in the background. Everybody's entirely peaceful. And she's standing there as if like, I am in the middle of a war zone about to be killed. Now, the funniest part about this is you have a Jewish protester in the back here holding up a sign that says, "Jews for a free Palestine." I mean, it really sums up a lot of this. But this is the funniest one, okay? This is the best one. Here's a self-written article by Sahar Tartak. "I was stabbed in the eye at Yale. The school has allowed anti-Israel students to run roughshed over their most basic policies. Yesterday, I paid the price for their inaction." Okay? The first sentence here, "I was stabbed in the eye last night on Yale University's campus because I am a Jew." Okay? First off, even if this did happen and you were stabbed, to say that it was because you were a Jew instead of because you were there intentionally being kind of antagonistic, because you were there as an agent provocateur of sorts, is pretty ridiculous, right? Especially considering, again, that Jewish students, Jewish organizations are leading many of these protests, right? But she says, "I was stabbed in the eye because I'm a Jew." Now, I didn't see this video until several days later, because I think maybe she didn't want people to see the actual video of the incident, because it kind of exposes a little bit of an exaggeration here from her, or a lie, maybe we'll call it. So here's the actual stabbing video that she's referencing. I'm going to turn the volume up here and we're just going to watch this. That was it. That was the "I got stabbed in the eye because I'm a Jew" video. Let's watch it again. I'll mute it this time. So maybe we can do slow motion here. So you have this guy, he's holding one of these like mini Palestinian flags, and brace yourselves, guys. I mean, I know it's gruesome, but he's holding the flag. It's sort of tilted towards her, and right there, I guess. Maybe the flag brushed her face. Maybe it kind of like knocked into her a little bit. What are we doing? What are we doing? This story, okay, it wasn't just her op-ed that she wrote for like Barry Weiss's free press outlet. This was picked up by so many different mainstream media outlets. It was on Fox News. It was all over the place, guys. Jewish Yale student stabbed in the eye by a rabidly violent anti-Semite college student, right? These were the kinds of headlines. These were the kinds of discussions that were happening. First off, she said she was hospitalized for this because of some grave injury that she suffered, and then literally like the next day she was making appearances. She did one debate with Crystal Ball on Piers Morgan, and her eye is completely fine. If you got stabbed in the eye, what's going on there, right? But I mean, you just watch this video. I can't get over this, guys. And the way she screams after, "You just stabbed me in the eye." Like, the dude is walking by and the flag brushed you in the face, maybe. And it doesn't even have a sharp tip at the end. It has a little rounded tip. I don't understand the impulse. I guess this is maybe why she was out there. I don't understand the impulse to just want to be victimized to this extent. That all of these protesters are just rabid, violent anti-Semites. You get brushed across the face with a flag, and it's the end of the goddamn world, right? So this one, that was just absolutely amazing, right? And again, it shows you the failure of the media. I'm sure we're not going to get any retractions from any of the media outlets who covered this as a violent stabbing incident, as if this guy, like the way that the media was talking about this, the way that she described it, made it seem as though somebody, like, she was just peacefully minding her business somewhere, and some pro-Palestine protester ran up out of nowhere and just started jabbing a pointy flag into her eye. And this is what actually happened. Now, again, I'm not even saying there haven't been any anti-Semitic incidents at any of these protests. I haven't really seen one, okay? Now, I've seen chants that people have issues with. I saw one that was posted by, I believe it was an NBC journalist, that almost blew my mind. Because he basically took a picture of some crazy guy who was standing on a random New York City street corner who was saying actually anti-Semitic things. And he said in the caption of the picture, just took a picture of this guy at the Columbia student protests. And it was not a student. It was not a guy who was even affiliated with the protests in any way, shape, or form. It was just a random lunatic on a street corner. So, again, it's one thing if you can point out actual instances of anti-Semitism or actual instances of violence. But when you're just making shit up and lying and going out here and doing shit like this, it's like you're actually working against your own cause. Like, you're making your cause less reliable in the eyes of anybody who's paying attention. You're making your own cause look ridiculous. Now, as all of this is happening, of course, we also have Jewish Voices for Peace, who decided to go out and to protest outside of Senator Chuck Schumer's house for, sending billions of dollars to Israel to continue their genocide. And so again, I just point this out to say there are so many brave, principled Jewish Americans who are putting themselves on the line to go and protest for what they think is right and what is right. And these protest movements are being smeared as like a genocidal anti-Jewish movement, right? I mean, it's so disgusting and despicable and actually anti-Semitic to pretend as if, first off, Jewish organizations aren't leading many of these protests, but that all Jewish people should be lumped in with the actions of the government of Israel. That is anti-Semitic. Now, I'll finish off with just a couple things here. We also have some statements. This was a sort of op-ed that was written and published by Zeteo, Mehdi Hassan's outlet. And the title is, I am a Jewish student at Columbia, don't believe what you're being told about campus anti-Semitism. So this is a Jewish student. He says, here's what you're not being told. The most pressing threats to our safety as Jewish students do not come from tents on campus. Instead, they come from the Columbia administration inviting police onto campus, certain faculty members, like that guy Shai Dividai, remember that guy? And third-party organizations that dox undergraduates. Frankly, I regret the fact that writing to confirm the safety of Jewish Ivy League students feels justified in the first place. I have not seen so many pundits hand-wringing over the safety of my Palestinian colleagues, mourning the deaths of family members, or the destruction of Gaza's cherished universities. And that's really what pisses me off the most about all of this, is that all of this is just a fucking distraction. All of this is a massive campaign by politicians and the media to make it out to be like the main issue that we should be dealing with right now is campus anti-Semitism instead of a genocide that our government is fully complicit in. That should be the focus. Okay, how much media coverage was there on the complete obliteration of the entire education system inside of Gaza? Thousands of students and teachers who have been killed in Gaza. How much coverage was there of that? I mean, there's been 100 times, 1,000 times more coverage of some campus slogans that people don't like. Our Congress passed a bill condemning the slogan "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," and then days later voted to send $26 billion to Israel. We are the most deeply unserious country on the face of the world, okay? Now, I'll finish off with this, because there's a lot of negatives, there's a lot of shitty stuff happening, but at the same time, this does give me hope. So, Sciences Po in Paris, the top university in France, which hosts a dual degree program with Columbia University, they just launched a Gaza Solidarity encampment. So the protests, as they have been getting more and more intensely cracked down on, are not only spreading here in the United States to other colleges and universities, they're spreading to other countries, to other continents. And this honestly does give me a little bit of hope, right? And at the end of the day, the sad part about all of this is that we know that history will vindicate these students. We know that history will vindicate that we were on the right side of this. But unfortunately, that doesn't change the here and now. The here and now is that children are being starved and killed in Gaza on a daily basis, right? And you know that the reason they're cracking down on these protests, the reason they're smearing everybody as anti-Semitic and whatever else, is because they don't have any response to the substance of what is actually happening in Gaza. They cannot respond to that. And so they have to resort to police crackdowns, to suspensions, to smear campaigns, to lies, because they know they are losing the argument. They are losing the battle as time continues to go on. So solidarity with all of these students. I hope it does continue to expand. I hope it doesn't escalate to violence from the police, but I do hope that it continues, because there is no cause that is more righteous than standing against a genocide. And it really does give me like a deep sense of hope to see, and Norm Finkelstein pointed this out in one of the recent interviews that I watched with him, that you have students, young people across this country, across the world, who are on the opposite end of the planet from the Gaza Strip. Right? The Gaza Strip, this tiny enclave, 5 miles by 25 miles long, a couple of million people living in it, people who have been oppressed for decades. And on the opposite end of the planet, we have students in the United States who are willing to put everything on the line to speak out on their behalf. And that at least gives me a little bit of hope for the future.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying